Okay, well, welcome back to the SDC presentation, our second one of the day. It's on the count question resolution operation. I'm here, my name's Erica Gardner, and I'm the Washington State lead for the State Data Center program, and I'm co-hosting with Charles Reinerson out of the Oregon SDC program. And we are assisted here today by Barb LaFleur from the Census Bureau. And I'd like to welcome and introduce Matthew Freites, who's the branch chief for the Count Question Resolution program. Thank you. Oh, and just as a matter of course, we'll hold our questions until the end.
But all right. You can put them in chat anytime.
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction. I'm Matt Freites. I'm the branch chief at the Census Bureau for the CQR branch. And I've given this presentation many times to different groups, but I just want to stress that the real point of this presentation is to give what I like to call the 30,000-foot view. It's a very generic overview of the scope of the program, kind of why we are here, and it's really not intended to answer any specific questions to a particular jurisdiction or a particular locality. Those are better answered for when our program is open. So I want to make that clear at the beginning in case there is some confusion there. But the whole point of this is really to kind of educate on why the operation is here, what the operation is, and to sort of prepare for the fact that the operation will be open in a couple of months. So an overview. Really what CQR's goal is to improve the quality of the base that's going to be used for post-2020 population estimates. And while the Census Bureau does everything that they can along the decennial census life cycle, and we're talking about quality assurance measures, robust quality assurance programs, we're really trying to ensure that every household and person is accounted for. But we offer this operation to be able to look at what we find processing errors along the way after the enumeration takes place. And if there's anything that comes up in research, we want the governments to be able to look at their data, ask us to review the data, and if we find one of these rare processing errors, we will make a change accordingly. When we do find them, the corrections will be issued when necessary to the tribal chairperson or the highest elected official of the affected government that sends us a case in, and any changes that are made will be uploaded to the CQR website, which will go online a little bit later this year. These CQR corrections will be reflected in the Census Bureau's population estimates program. I mentioned that at the top about how that's the point. We're looking to improve the base of that so that we can have better quality for the population estimates for further on in this decade. There's a few things that CQR won't do. Now, we will not revise the apportionment data that's been sent to the president already, nor will we be changing any of the redistricting data that's sent to the states, which just completed as of last month. We also won't be changing any of the demographic and housing characteristics files. So it's something to note here. Like we are after all these deliverables, and so we won't be changing them. We may not collect any new data, and it is not the same as a special census, and I will get into why we may not collect data a little bit later. CQR is also not a mechanism to address any data concerns that may come about due to disclosure avoidance methods, such as differential privacy that the Bureau puts on. But if during our investigation we do find some of these processing errors, we are going to make sure that we communicate that to the jurisdiction, and we will make sure that all of those are uploaded to our website. So that's kind of the overview of what CQR is. Really, the scope is down to two types of cases, and there are what I call three geographic scenarios within those. So we have a living quarter count case, which has two components to it. It has a geocoding component and a coverage component. And in the geocoding component, when a government sends us in a case and there are certain 2020 census tabulation blocks, we're really looking at the geographic location of housing for that particular case or that particular block. And that's, when we're looking at it from a visual sense, as you see in this example, there are certain housing units that should have been geocoded to a certain block. In a coverage case, we're looking for whether a processing area on the data processing side erroneously left out housing, and we'd like to make that adjustment to make sure that the housing is where it should be and that the population that goes with it should also be accounted for. There's also a boundary case, and a boundary case differs in that we are looking at legally mandated boundaries as of January 1st of 2020. And if one needs to be moved, we are not only making sure that it is moved, but we're making sure that any housing that needs to change based off of that move is accounted for. When I talk about an example of a processing error, so there's what I call, if there is an address that's on like an ad sheet for updated numerator, say at Remote Alaska, which is a paper operation, and let's say that address doesn't make it into our master address file system, that would be something that'd be considered a processing error. It was erroneously left off, even though the data was collected. Those are rare, like I said, but that's just one example of it. And again, because we have all the robust quality control measures, these things are rare, but we do want to allow this avenue just in case there was something that was missed. During our Federal Register notice period about a year ago now, as a part of the 60-day public comment period, we received a lot of feedback on two things. On the start date for CQR based off of the new dates around the redistricting program, the redistricting data set dates, and also the scope of CQR as it was seen as limited. And while we looked at that feedback, we looked at those questions and considered it. In response, we did do one thing. We did change the start date for CQR, which was supposed to be October 1st, and it is now January 3rd of 2022. And the way that we saw it is that it was giving governments the ability to have their data, be able to look at it, and be able to engage the Census Bureau prior to case acceptance ahead of time. One of the things we also were planning on doing or looking into the feasibility of doing was expanding the scope a little bit to allow governments to submit cases that were requesting a review of specifically group quarters population counts that considered administrative records which were supplied by the government as part of that submission. However, a couple of weeks ago during a legal review done by our legal department, it was deemed that federal law requires data collection for the census to end. And the reason why I mentioned it a few slides ago was because this occurs once the apportionment results have been delivered to Congress and the President. So as a part of CQR, the Census Bureau cannot continue collecting response data for the census through CQR. And this new the new group quarters scope was considered a collecting of new information. The CQR operation can only correct errors that occurred during the processing of information or these processing errors that was collected during enumeration. However, even though it can't be done as a part of CQR in general, the Census Bureau is going to look into feasibility of being able to accommodate governments to request this particular review of group quarters in another avenue that will still hopefully educate the population, population estimates base, having a hard time with that one, in the future, but we just cannot do it as a part of CQR legally. This was something that we were hopeful for, but unfortunately we are not able to do it. But I want to stress again that the Bureau will be looking at feasibility, and any new information around that, which will not be a part of my operation, will be communicated in the same fashion that information on CQR was. I just don't have any details on that right now. So what does a day in the life of CQR look like, or a day in the life of a CQR case? Well, the tribal, state, and local governments will review their published 2020 census results, and if they suspect errors with their boundaries or with their counts by block, they can request a CQR case be filed with us. My staff will receive those cases, we will review those cases for completeness and correctness, and we will determine whether those cases are within scope based off the scope that has been established for the operation. In-scope cases will then be sent to our geographic subject matter experts, and they will do research and hope to come to a resolution of some type. During that research, the research staff will review the 2020 census enumeration and processing records in conjunction with the evidence that was supplied by the governmental units with the CQR case. I do want to say that research may or may not find processing errors within the 2020 census data. However, communication will happen all across the board. So if no processing errors are found, there will be no updates and the case will be considered closed. If processing errors are found, then they will be addressed within the Census Bureau's records and systems. And once resolved, the Census Bureau will provide certified counts to any governments that were impacted by the CQR case. If a case is deemed not in scope, there will be communication on that. And communication is really key for CQR, at least from the Census Bureau's perspective. While we will be accepting cases, we will be communicating upon acceptance and receipt of that case, in scope or out of scope, if we need any additional information as part of the research, as well as the disposition at the end. So there will be a lot of communication there. The Census Bureau we are trying to hold ourselves to a 90-day turnaround for each case, but that is very much going to be dependent on the volume of cases that we receive. So at the very beginning of CQR, we may be inundated with cases that we need to get through, so we may not be able to make that 90-day window. However, we will be communicating that with you to keep you abreast of anything that needs to happen and also the time frame of when we hope to complete this. The Census Bureau at the end of the case will provide a disposition, like I said, and we will send those to the appropriate highest elected official or an official designee of that highest elected official. And it will be sent to all impacted tribal, state, and local governments, and we will post these as errata or corrections to our CQR website that will, again, go online later this year. Some key dates for CQR. I mentioned that the redistricting data or the delivery of data from the 2020 census to the states would be delivered by the end of September, and that has taken place. And this is a key data delivery for governments to be able to decide whether they want to participate in CQR. Our Federal Register notice is currently being updated. Like I said, we had considered possibly adding new scope. It is now out of scope, so we're now going through all of the documentation that's necessary to post for the public 30-day comment period, which will hopefully be happening very, very soon. That Federal Register notice will look very similar to the one that was posted for the 60-day comment period. But again, this is a legal requirement so that we may obtain OMB approval to actually conduct CQR on time in January. In December of 2021, December 1st, most likely, there will be an initial sort of communication blast with all of the highest elected officials and governmental units that we have on file. And this will basically to announce the program in a letter to kind of say this is CQR, these are the dates, and so forth. And there will also be an accompanying flyer that will sort of be a one-pager front and back that's going to have a lot more detailed information on not only how to participate, different types of cases, communication avenues, and our website and so forth. At this time as well, the CQR website will go live, and all documentation and resources that the Census Bureau will be providing will be made available. And this is the website that will house any errata that will be posted as the operation goes along. Also in December, our tiered call center will be online, and this is really where a lot of the questions are going to go. And it will have a tiered approach, which means any questions that need to be escalated will happen that way. And there will be FAQs that our call center folks will have to be able to answer any questions to help facilitate participation. In the event something gets escalated that cannot be resolved essentially by this call center, those calls will come directly to Census headquarters. In January of 2022, January 3rd, this is when CQR will officially be fully open for business. And I mean, we will be accepting cases from the governmental units or the eligible tribal, state, and local governments. And this is when the research phase will begin. This research phase, as far as new cases are concerned, we will stop accepting new cases June 30th of 2023. So there will be roughly an 18-month window to not only look at the data that's been published for the 2020 census, but also to interact with the Census Bureau and submit a case officially. We have to be done with our research and dispositions by September 30th of 2023. So again, all research and final dispositions with corrections will be sent out by September 30th of 2023. And where is the operation? Well, we are getting closer and closer to December 1st somehow. And right now the management team is finalizing all the documentation that is needed for the OMB approval and the Federal Register notice 30-day comment period. And those documents include things that are listed here, these public FAQs, which will hopefully be as all-encompassing as possible to help facilitate any questions. A participant guide, which is a very lengthy document that is currently going through review. And that is really going to be a one-stop shop document with all of the necessary information on the many different avenues to participate. The flyer that I mentioned is going out with our initial communication blast. Letters that we have, which will be used in many different places, so obviously from case acceptance to case dispositions, and those are some examples of letters that we will have. And our website, which will not only house all of these documents, but also the errata and other types of communication avenues that will be available for participants during the CQR operation. So it is a short and sweet presentation, and that is the information that I have at this time. I appreciate giving the time and the platform to speak, and I'll open it up to questions.
Does anyone have any questions? So in this I'll go ahead with a few of mine. In this presentation and some others, you've alluded to other avenues to address questions or about the counts that can't be addressed by the CQR process. Is there any, and you've said that you couldn't elaborate yet, is there any timeline that you could give us about when we might be hearing more about that?
Unfortunately, no. This legal review happened 2 weeks ago, so we not only had to scramble with this information, but where they're trying to identify the folks that are really going to be putting this together, and that is going to be outside of my area. So I really can't speak to timelines on it. All I can say is that we will be communicating as often as possible about where those, what those those avenues are in terms of feasibility, because we are striving to meet that goal within the legal requirements of whatever operations or programs are going to be accommodating, I guess, that ask. So unfortunately, I don't have a better answer than that.
Again, I'll give anyone else the opportunity to jump in with their questions. You can either type them into chat or raise your hand. In the absence of an immediate question, I'll jump in with another one of mine. Is there anything that you can elaborate on? You mentioned the processing errors of addresses missed. So in Washington State, we've noticed quite a bit of undercounting of housing, particularly in the unincorporated areas with update leave and seasonal housing. From our preliminary analysis, it looks like, like the absolute error in the housing count is over 2% in 23 out of 39 of our counties. For 2 counties, Okanagan and Ferry, there are fewer housing units counted in 2020 than there was in 2010. And this is despite net housing growth in those counties. So we're very concerned about the housing undercount, and it looks like the only way to address that is the processing error. And so any information you can provide about how one would go about doing that, is the presence of the address in the map, enough to move that case forward? Anything you can say?
I can't really speak to that specific example because each case that comes in is different from the other, and it's really dependent on obviously what we have in our records and also what is supplied by the government. So the best advice that I can give, and I give this a lot, is to communicate with us as early and often as possible. So we open our doors for communication on December 1st in terms of being able to ask about data that you're seeing and other things like that. And we have this call center for a reason. We have the email box for a reason for case submission. We have all these documents for a reason to be able to essentially facilitate participation. And that's the best advice that I can give. Because I don't have all the information in front of me, I cannot speak to a specific example like what you're speaking to. But the reason why we have all these resources, the reason why we have all these communication avenues is because each case is different, and we want to be able to provide as much expertise as possible on what we are seeing. So that's really the best thing that I can say, is to communicate as early and often as possible, so that the Census Bureau can help out and look at what we have in order to deem whether that's considered in scope or out of scope. But again, we are limited in our scope because of the fact that we don't have the ability to collect new information, but also there's so many quality assurance processes that happen during the life cycle, from the update of the address list at the very beginning with address canvassing, which I worked on, all the way through to where we are now. But again, the communication is very, very key. And it's just something I stress over and over and over again.
Well, I'll just add, we're getting some questions coming in, but just a comment here. I don't think that some of the issues we're observing are unique or particular to the area. I've heard from other states, and they're all observing the same thing, that rural update leave and seasonal locations had undercounts of housing units. And so it's more of a systemic issue than a particular issue.
Sure, and all of those will be looked at, as they come in and as they're communicated the same way. We will do the same research if it's deemed in scope. We will look at the same criteria all across the board. And that's all that I can say. So if it's something that's deemed as systemic, everyone that comes in will be looked at and for being in scope, and also researched if necessary. And any changes that need to be made based off of the research that we have or the research that was found, those changes will be made as necessary. So that's what I can say. All right, let's see.
Okay, questions in the chat. First one is, do you know yet what data will be allowed to challenge counts, addresses, local data modeling, etc.?
So in December, when we basically open our doors for communication, all those resources, that participant guide that I mentioned is really, again, it's like a 120-page document which lays out all of the avenues and all of the required pieces of documentation that we are looking for. Obviously, other pieces of documentation can be put in, and it's going to be a conjunction of whatever is submitted. Obviously, so like for living quarter count cases in the past, we asked for an address list. We're not requiring that this decade, but it doesn't mean that we won't accept it, for instance. So those can be put in. Basically, any evidence that any jurisdiction feels would help their case or that the Census Bureau should have should be submitted. But as far as what exactly needs to be submitted, that will all be in that participant guide and the other resources. So that's the best thing I can say.
Okay, next question from Philip. In group quarters population, how will disclosure avoidance affect a perceived population count? How can we tell what happened in blocks where the GQ population is located?
So unfortunately, I don't really have any expertise in disclosure avoidance. It's something that happens well outside of the CQR process, and it happens at the data level. All that I know is for housing units, the population will be held varying at the at the block level. So that's why we focus on the block level and looking at housing. For GQs, I don't really have the information to say yes or no as to like how it's going to be applied. As far as if you feel that there is a perceived error based off of disclosure avoidance, again, the communication is key. Contact the Census Bureau, let us know what you're seeing. Obviously, give us as much evidence as possible so that we can look into it. And as far as what we see, in disclosure avoidance and so forth, there's limited information that we will have as to how that was applied, and that's why it's done that way. There are other folks that do it, and all of these data products are applied differently. And we obviously have to be able to speak to it lightly, knowing that it's actually going to be applied. But the particulars are very scientific, and it's well outside of my wheelhouse.
So I'll just follow up quickly on that one. I think we know that the number of GQs in a block is invariant, and there's information that has been released on that, but we will not be able to affect the disclosure avoidance on the count.
Yeah, that'll be a challenge because if there's a small difference from what we know is the count is the accurate total, that may be disclosure avoidance. But if there's a huge difference that's going to affect the city's population in a significant way, it seems like it's something that the city will want to have investigated.
Right, and that's why I always say, if you feel that there's if you feel that there's an error, to get in touch with us. That's why we're here, because it's I don't say, oh, you shouldn't contact us for this or for that. What you're perceiving based off of the data that you're seeing from the Census Bureau, and obviously the data that is being kept at these localities. Just get in touch with us, talk to us, let us know what you're seeing, give us as much evidence as possible, and that's really the best thing that we can get in order to be able to decide whether something is in scope, and to also be able to competently and research it essentially, or completely research it. The more information that we have, the better that we can do to come to some semblance of a resolution.
Okay, there's one more question, and then I want to weigh in with a question and comment. But is there any separate correction process contemplated with respect to housing units, not just GQs, for informing annual population estimates?
So I think if you're asking about whether there's going to be something similar to the GQ scope that I mentioned. At least not that I know of, but again, that is outside of my jurisdiction. All of that was taken out of my hands and is being planned at another level of the Bureau. And if something does come out of it, some avenue that is similar to that GQ scope, it will be communicated. I just do not have that information. Well,
yeah, I wanted to sort of ask Erica and to comment in general that in past decades, there have been issues that are beyond the scope of count question resolution, and Oregon and Washington are able to adjust their annual population estimates So, I know that Washington has a long tradition of, especially for very small jurisdictions, doing special censuses to reestablish a baseline for their population estimates. Erica, do you have anything to add about that that's relevant to this topic? People might want to, if the Census Bureau can't help them, maybe we can.
Right. So we have not determined all the things that we might be considering to adjust the population, but certainly smaller cities or jurisdictions have done censuses in the past and reset the base for our population estimates. That just due to cost isn't feasible for many jurisdictions. So we basically, I think we're open to considering other information that might influence our population estimate program.
Sure. Again, population estimates happens somewhere else at the Bureau. CQR is a part of it, so the results of CQR are just one part of what informs, the population estimates base. And as far as if there's going to be any other information of, informing that, again, I'm over planning CQR and how CQR operates, making sure that it gets off the ground, making sure that it has all the resources that are needed for governments to participate. Once it leaves CQR's, purview, so to speak, and goes to the population estimates program, there is a whole other division at the Census Bureau that is over that plans that executes it. And we will essentially work with them if needed, on something that is happening from CQR. But I don't have all the information on everything that goes into the population estimates program, unfortunately.
And my comment also was regarding the population estimates that our own states do for sharing of certain tax revenues. So, those are important to the local jurisdictions as well. And we've got one more question from Guy. We have had hotels and motels converted to essentially group quarters due to housing people who have lost homes due to fires. And I'll add also, both our local agencies are, I guess it's post-census, but buying hotels and motels to house homeless people. But so Guy mentions that will be important to know when doing population estimates going forward.
The same thing is occurring in Washington too, and we do track that information and consider it in the Washington State population estimate process. But whether or not those similar, new group quarters were counted in the 2020 census, we're still uncertain about that.
Yeah, and of course, the biggest fires in Oregon were in September 2020, so it would have been after the census count, but it wasn't. But the census non-response follow-up wasn't completely finished at that point. So, an interesting challenge. Yeah, Nikki asks about how to handle the homes lost to wildfire for count challenges. That's wondering if there's any thoughts.
I would say, again, all the information that you have is very key to communicate to us. The census is looking at where housing is as of April 1st of 2020. So that's all that I could say is any information that you have, supply it to us, get in touch with us. We'll work with you on it, and we will do what we can based off of the scope of the operation and the information that we get. Unfortunately, those are my thoughts across the board because that's really the truth at this time in October of 2021. And once we start getting actual case documentation in January, we will be able to look at it in a much more in-depth way.
Yeah, that's key, April 1st, 2020. So even if the homes were lost in September, they should have been counted in the census.
And that's a difference than the boundary part of it. So boundaries, we're looking at January 1st of 2020, whereas, enumeration is April 1st of 2020. And we make sure to make that distinction because it is a little bit different for that. But that's the only date difference there for any boundary corrections that may need to be made.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Any further questions, or Erica?
Well, only that we're anxiously awaiting the Federal Register. And so I'm guessing in order to make your December guideline or deadlines, it will have to be dropped in the next week or two.
Yeah, it's been a long road, for sure, because of, considering all the feedback that we received, and honestly what you're speaking to, the difficulties with COVID-19. Obviously there's many factors that went into making this census challenging, and we at the Census Bureau are obviously looking into it. Unfortunately, we are beholden by the legal boundaries, and that's where we just got hung up. And for CQR's purposes, again, it's only CQR that can't collect this new data, but again, it doesn't mean that the Census Bureau can't still try to accommodate some of these concerns in a way that doesn't affect those legal boundaries. The data collection must end, and that is a finite boundary that we were told we cannot go past. So I think that's the difficult part, is it seems like the Census Bureau is unwilling to do it. It's just that legally we can't do it as a part of just this operation, but the organization as a whole can look into it through other measures that will still hopefully inform the population estimates base. But as far as our Federal Register notice is concerned, we had to consider all of that, try to do what we could to accommodate it, and it's just been a long road of working with folks, seeing what's feasible. To add something new to the census is a time-consuming process. There's a lot of moving parts that could go into it. So it's definitely something we are hopeful to drop. Right now it's in executive review, and hopefully has left the Bureau by now. I don't know where it is exactly or whose desk it's on, but yes, we're looking to get it as soon as possible. We are up against it, that's for sure.
So I know there's several jurisdictions who are represented on Washington's side on this meeting. Does anyone want to bring up like a scenario from your area?
Okay, am I stopping the recording?
Well, we should thank our presenter before you do that, for the record, and let everybody know, again, if you weren't on the last meeting, but you got this link, especially apparently the people that registered on in Oregon last week didn't have the right link for this week's meeting. So
go ahead and call in.
So
yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Will do.
Bye.
I'll do it now. Bye.
we will have the same link for the next session, which
Charles, wait,
yes.
hold on a second. Our next speaker is having some technical issues. She will be signing in shortly. We may not be able to run the next session, so okay.
Okay, but if we do run the next session,